What's up, YouTube? I'm Guy, and today we are going to be checking out a Squale watch, the reference 1521. Actually, I've heard people say that it's pronounced Squale, and other people say it's pronounced Squale. However it's pronounced, that's what we're taking a look at today. Before we get started, a big thanks to my friends over at Exquisite Timepieces. They are a local authorized dealer in the Naples, Florida area of over 50 watch brands, including Squale, and they allowed me to borrow this watch for review. If you're interested in learning more about Exquisite Timepieces, I do encourage you to go over to exquisitetimepieces.com, and if you happen to give them a call and speak to Evan over there, let him know that you heard about their store from Guy on the JustBlueFish channel. So there's been kind of, I don't know if I want to say a debate, but a lot of attention around this brand over the last couple of years on YouTube. Some YouTube channels have been featuring it quite a lot. It's gotten a lot of positive attention and a lot of negative attention. I've tried to sift through that a little bit. Tried to figure out what's true, what's not true. A lot of people say that the alleged history, the provenance of this brand is fictitious, it's made up. I don't really know if that's true or not, so I'm probably not going to comment on that much at all in this video. I'm just going to take a look at the watch. People have made allegations that this watch has a lot of parts, like the case, manufactured in China, for example. And I haven't seen any substantial or credible evidence to state that that is actually true. There's just been a lot of allegations about that sort of topic. I don't know anything about that either. Again, there's no credible evidence to suggest one way or the other whether or not that's a fact. So I'm not going to touch on those hot topics too much in this video. Again, I just want to look at the watch. What can I say about this watch? Well, initially, before having had the opportunity to check it out, I didn't expect to really like the watch, I'm going to be honest. Based on pictures, based on some videos, I just thought it wasn't really the style or the kind of watch for me. Maybe I had some preconceived notions based on all of the rhetoric thrown around about this brand. I don't really know. But going into it, my impressions were going to be somewhat negative. My expectations, I guess, is really what I should say. Well, after having had it here for a little while, I gotta tell you, I actually kind of like it. I think that it's a really well-made product for the most part. It has some shortcomings, and every watch does. I'll point those out in detail when we get over to the tabletop. But yeah, overall, I think it's really not a bad product. So let's dive over to the tabletop. I'll give you the features and the specs. I'll give you my impressions on the overall build and quality of this watch. And then we're going to come back over here for my final thoughts, my closing thoughts, maybe some of my pros and cons. So stick around for that as well. All right, guys, here we have it. The Squale 1521 50 Atmos, $900 retail price. And I don't see it available anywhere online at Gray Market, for example. I think the only chance you'll have of getting it at a lower price would probably be to go secondhand. But if anyone knows where you can get these new for a steal, maybe let us know down in the comments. Let's go over the basic specs and features about this watch. 42mm case diameter, 20mm lug width, 14mm in thickness, with a lug width from one side of the case to the other, or what I like to call the watch's wingspan, of about 48mm. We have a 316L high-polished stainless steel case. The crystal covering the dial is, of course, sapphire crystal, and we have a 120-click unidirectional dive or lapse time bezel. The bezel has an aluminum insert, of course, and it is a fully graduated insert. There's a screw-down crown at the roughly 4 o'clock position. This watch features 500 meters of water resist, and it runs on an ETA 2824-2. Before we jump into anything else, let's talk about that ETA movement. I could not find out online. It's not listed on the Squale website, either their Swiss or the Squale USA website, what grade ETA movement that is. I've heard people discuss it online, that it's a top grade movement. I've heard other people suggest that it's an Elabor grade movement. I honestly don't know. I think it's maybe possible that given the availability at the time when these watches are being manufactured, that they might use one movement or the other, but I couldn't say that with 100% certainty. Nevertheless, the ETA 2824-2 is a hand-winding and hacking movement. Of course, it's automatic, and it has roughly a 38-hour power reserve. It runs at 28,800 vibrations per hour. Accuracy-wise, I threw this watch on my time grapher. It's keeping excellent time, around +3, +4 seconds per day in most positions. It's it's an impressive little movement. It's one of my favorites, whether it's an Elabor or a top grade. Not a huge difference either way. It's the top grade is a little bit more highly adjusted or regulated, but both very good movements, so either way, you're getting something solid here. As I had mentioned, this watch's case is completely high polished, and it's really nicely done actually. You can see that there's some bevels along the flanks of the lugs, differentiating from the top of the case and the side of the case. The only real problem with this case in my mind is this right here, Squale engraved in great big bold letters right on the side of the case. That is not my favorite design choice. I don't like it on the Invicta watches, I didn't like it on the Blancpain 50 Fathoms, and I certainly don't like it here. That's just my 2 cents. I know most people are going to say they don't care. It is what it is. I'm not a fan of it. The bezel, interestingly, kind of, I don't know if it'll show on camera too well, hangs over the side of the case ever so slightly. So while this is a 42 millimeter on paper, it's really the bezel that's 42 millimeters. The case might be slightly slimmer. It is otherwise, like I said, really nicely done. The lugs are downward sloping, relatively thin. It's 14 millimeters in total thickness, but because of the profile of the shape, it doesn't really feel that thick. Overall, yeah, I kind of like the size and scale, the dimensions, the geometry of this case. On the opposing side, you can see we have a crown at the 4 o'clock position. The crown is, of course, signed with that, I believe it's like a Van Buren logo, the family that owned this brand allegedly in the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken. You can see that the shape of this side of the case is a little bit different. It has this flat side right at the 3 o'clock position. So that's kind of an interesting design element. I'm not exactly sure, why they went with that, if there's like a technical reason or if it's just purely for some sort of style or aesthetic. Nevertheless, though, the left and the right hand sides of the cases are not mirrored copies of one another because of that flat section there at the 3 o'clock side. The 120 click unidirectional elapsed time bezel is done pretty well. It's got an aluminum insert that is fully graduated, and you might be able to see there at each 10-minute mark, the graduations are an inverse triangle shape instead of a circular pip. Otherwise, though, kind of similar in style and look to a lot of Seiko watches, including the SKX 007 or 009 with the completely graduated dial, or bezel, I guess I should say. The edge of the bezel is really nicely done. It's a coin edge bezel. You get really good grip and traction on it. Manipulating it works very well. Overall, I like mostly everything about this bezel, including that nice little high polished edge, which I'm not sure how well it's showing up on my camera. Yeah, overall it's implemented pretty well, but manipulating or operating the bezel is not kind of the smoothest. It's not what I would expect from a watch approaching a $1,000 price point, if I'm being honest. The clicks are solid. It's not too stiff, but there's a lot of play in the bezel, as you can see here. It's not of the highest quality in terms of the overall action or functionality of the bezel. It works fine, like I said. At least it's not too stiff or too loose. The tension feels just about right. It's maybe a little bit gritty, maybe I would say that, and all of that like play, that's really where you feel that sort of grittiness. The Luminess Pip at the 0 marker, I believe, is also covered with a small piece of sapphire glass to protect it, so that's a nice little touch or feature. The crystal itself covering the dial is, of course, a scratch-resistant sapphire crystal. I think it is AR coated on the underside. It's weird. There's a lot of things about this watch that are information or specs wise that just aren't really available online. I look at Squale's USA website. I look at their Swiss website. The Swiss website says it's something like an anti-dazzle crystal, which I assume is a really kind of silly way of saying AR coated. On the Squale USA website, there's no mention of AR coating at all. I've seen other reviews, Worn and Wound, I think I was looking at, state that it's double AR coated. I don't know what the truth is. I will say that in practice, it looks like it does have AR coating. Whether or not it is double coated or just coated on the underside, I guess that's a bit of a mystery. The dial on this watch, in some ways, is really nice, and in other ways, it's rather uneventful. The coloration of this particular model, the blue dial, it's got a really nice sort of, sunbursty gradient type of effect. I don't know how well it'll show on camera here, but in person it looks really nice. On the other hand, we have no applied markers or anything. It's just a simple flat printed dial. And again, approaching this $1,000 price point, I sort of would expect a little bit more. The printing on the dial, it's well done. It's neat and clean. It's tidy. There's no problems with the quality. I would just expect something a little bit better as we start moving up into this price point. Of course, we have the Squale branding up at the 12 o'clock side, and then more Squale branding down at the 6 o'clock side. I think that might be, a little bit of overkill, but that's just personal taste. The handset is something else that I'm not a huge fan of stylistically. Kind of pencil style handset, but they're just painted white on the hour hand and the second hand, and then this orange on the minute hand. I'm not a big fan of orange in general, so if it were me, I would just go with either all white handset or potentially nice stainless steel polished handset would also be a plus here for me. The markers, again, they're just printed on the dial, as well as that seconds track or minutes track outboard of the markers. They are super luminova filled, and the lume is pretty good. No complaints with the lume there. I'll bring in a lume shot and show it to you guys in action here. Yeah, that's done well. Outside of the dial, we have this, on a Rolex, we'd call that the rehaut. They'd have like this engraving all along that outer edge. I've seen it called the flange as well. Let's call it a flange in this case, but it is completely high polished. So you can see as you kind of tilt the watch down, you start getting reflections in that flange. You can see the markers reflecting. It's kind of a cool little touch, honestly. I like that. I think it's well done. The crown on this watch is one of my biggest points of contention. You see how far recessed into the case it is, and how close it is to that bottom right lug. Manipulating or operating the crown is cumbersome at best. It's a pretty large, oversized crown, but because of how deeply recessed into the case it is, unscrewing it is a little bit difficult, and hand winding the movement is a little bit difficult. The threading on the crown itself, it's not the best, but it's also not awful. Some of the worst has been on like Seiko SKXs that I've had. This isn't that bad, but yeah, it's not some of the best threading either. Once we get that crown out into the first hand wind position, it is just difficult to get your fingers on it to hand wind it. A lot of times you might just try to do this little action from the bottom side. Number one, that doesn't work really well because it's pretty stiff. It's a pretty high level of resistance. So I can't really even get it spinning by doing this method here. And I don't like putting this sort of horizontal torque. You can see the head of the crown rotating, or not rotating, but kind of rocking. I don't like putting that kind of torque on my crown. I want to get it firmly with both fingers. Now, because it's so deeply set into the case, I can really only get about a quarter turn of the crown with each kind of pass. So it takes, if you want to give it like 40 full winds to give it a full power reserve, it's going to take a while of just winding it up. Now, fortunately, it's an automatic movement, so you're not going to have to do that often unless you rotate this in your collection a lot and you don't wear it often. Assuming it stays running, it's not really that much of an issue. But yeah, when you do have to hand wind this movement up, it is cumbersome. The last thing to probably cover here is the strap. It comes on this black rubber strap, and overall it's pretty good. It's not the most flexible strap that I've ever seen or used, but it's of nice quality, and it has that funny kind of vanilla flavored scent to it. We have some perforations here on the buckle side. We have 2 keepers, both floating rubber keepers, and a high polished stainless steel buckle. This buckle is probably the only real downside about the strap. On the other side, you can see you have the Squale logo on the strap, and then of course your holes for that buckle, along with some extra little perforations on the edges. The strap does have this kind of wave pattern here at the lugs, which probably aids in giving it a little bit more flexibility so that it will conform to the wrist better, and that's nice as well. The buckle itself has some finishing problems. You can probably see these flat portions all along the top edge of the buckle. They're very unfinished. And you would think for something so simple that they would get that right. I mean, buckles cost next to nothing. I could buy them all day long for under $5 online. Yeah, it's really, I mean, you know, not a big deal, but kind of a shame that they just sort of threw any old kind of rough, unfinished buckle on this watch. On the sides of the buckle, there's another unfinished portion. I don't know how well that'll pick up on camera, but it's just, it's rough. There's machining marks. It's certainly not well done. So there's the Squale 1521 on my 6 3/4 inch wrist, roughly. It's a little bit on the thick side, a little bit chunky, if you will, but yeah, overall, I'm kind of impressed with it. It's better than I was expecting going into it. I think that the strap, it's a little bit too long for me. You can see that the tail of the strap is kind of peeking over the edge of my wrist there. That's not my favorite thing in the world, but that's pretty common for me. If you have a bigger wrist, that won't be an issue. But yeah, there it is. I hope you enjoyed checking this out. Overall, more impressed than I expected. Stick with me for my closing thoughts. I'll talk about, my pros and cons in conclusion, and I'll let you know if I think this watch is worth buying. So what are my final thoughts, my closing thoughts, my pros and cons about this watch? Well, like I had said, I was coming into this with some negative expectations, if I'm going to be honest. There's a lot of negativity about this watch and this brand thrown around online. No shortage of it. There's a lot of positive out there, too. So, being as how it is such a divisive product, and I guess maybe I'm just a little bit of a negative person in general, I went into it with that sort of outlook. I'm happy to say that for the most part, it's been completely erased. I mean, again, there's some negatives we saw on the tabletop. The crown, I am not a fan of the crown at all. The positioning, the how deeply it's inset into the case, it's just difficult to manipulate and operate. I don't think that the bezel, in particular, that action, is anything special to write home about. But it's still a pretty good quality watch, and yeah, relatively I am impressed with it. That said, would I own this watch? Would I purchase this watch? Not for $900, if I'm being completely honest. If I was going to buy a watch like this, I'd probably go for something like, I don't know, the Glycine Combat Sub GL0087. That is a very similar watch in terms of style, and my experience with Glycine, having reviewed a Combat Sub, was pretty favorable. I think that that's a really good watch too, and it's a lot more affordable. With a caveat, retail price on the Glycine Combat Sub is $1,450, and should you buy it at that price? No. Do not buy it at that price. At Gray Market, though, you can pick up this watch for $450 or thereabouts, and I think at $450, yeah, that would be the one that I would go for if I was looking for something like this. I think it's pretty similar visually. I think that quality-wise, Glycine, at least in my experience with them, is right up there on this same level. ETA movement, just like this. Overall, yeah, I don't think that at this $900 price point I could go for the Squale when there's other options out there that are similar and much more affordable. Now, if you like the watch, if there's something about it that just sings to you, by all means. Like I said, it's a pretty good watch. I like the quality. I like the fit, the finish. Stylistically, yeah, it's nice looking. But, well, with the exception of that engraving on the side of the case, I hate that engraving. I hated it on the Invicta, I hated it on the Blancpain 50 Fathoms, I hate it on this watch, that's just me. But if you can get past that, or if that doesn't bother you, you don't mind that, then yeah, if you want the watch, you like what you like, that's cool, go ahead, pull the trigger, enjoy it, you probably will enjoy it. So there we have it, guys, there's my review of the Squale 1521, the 50 Atmos, I guess is the product line that it falls under. Yeah, overall, much more impressed than I expected to be. So I'll close this out by saying thanks for tuning in, thanks for watching. As always, I appreciate it. If you'd like to help the channel out, follow me on my Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Those links are down in the description. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, that's always appreciated. Big thanks to you guys that have been over there. Yeah, I really do appreciate that. There's also a link to to Amazon through my affiliate account. If you like anything that I've reviewed and you are thinking about buying it, click on that link first. And I get a small commission. Those commissions do add up, and a lot of people have been using it, so thanks to you guys as well. Well, that's going to do it for today. Until the next one, I'll go ahead and say bye now.